it in the lab, you have to take into consideration all the loading effects, all the input and output impedances. Generally, we tend to ignore the input impedances and the output impedances. So we just simply say, let's multiply 10 by 10 by 10. You're going to get 1,000. In reality, you're not supposed to do that. See? So it's a modeling issue. The discrepancy between theory and practice is basically, an incomplete modeling, inappropriate modeling. That's all. But it is not that theoretical response is one world and the experimental response is coming from another world or something. It's not like that, you know what I mean? All right, so we have, let's assume that we have a source resistance and an input resistance to each one of those amplifiers, and also an output resistance, R01, O2, O3, and then there is a load resistance at the end. When you write down a formula for the gain, you're going to have a formula like this. How do you write the formula? You trace the signal from the left to the right, from the input to the output. That's how you just follow the signal. You write this formula. So what's the condition now that the gain is simply A1, A2, A3? In order for this gain to be A1, A2, A3, you need to have a condition. What is the condition? The condition is that these voltage dividers should disappear. In other words, they should be all unity, one. R input 1 divided by R input 1 plus R source, this should be almost equal to 1. Same here. This should be almost equal to 1. All right. What do you need to do to make this almost equal to 1? You need to make R source much smaller than R input 1. So this R source has to be much smaller than this. And likewise, you need R output 1 here to be much smaller than R input 2, and R output 2 should be much smaller than R input 3, and R output 3 should be much smaller than RL. See what I mean? So for example, if those R outputs are in the order of a few ohms and RL is a few kilo ohms, it's okay. Let's suppose RL is 2 kilo ohms, RO is 2 ohms. That's a ratio of 1,000. So the potential divider works in favor of the, it neglects small quantities and neglects large quantities as well. But then neglecting has different nature. When you neglect a small quantity, you make it 0. When you neglect a large quantity, you assume it's infinity. So by fulfilling this condition, you're going to end up with this. So that's cascaded amplifiers. So the lesson that we learned from here is that when you design a cascaded amplifier, you need to fully represent the situation with equations so that it lends itself to good approximation. You know that terminology? There is a terminology here, engineering terminology. It lends itself to engineering approximation. So we can say And there are examples in this course where I'm going to remind you of this. We can say that the gain of this stage is approximately A1, A2, A3, the product, provided that the output resistances are very small compared to the input resistances. And the source resistance also is very small compared to the input resistance, and the output resistance is very small compared to the load resistance. If you secure that condition, you're going to end up with this, you know. So a lot of times I pass by students in the lab, and he wants to design an amplifier of a gain of 30, for example. So he has one amplifier, one stage has a gain of 5, another stage has a gain of 6. But when he builds it in the lab, he doesn't get the 30. He gets 20, for example, instead of 30. And the reason you're getting 20 instead of 30 is because you neglected the loading effects, the relative ratios between input and output impedances and all of that. So I thought of making this part a subsection of our chapter. It doesn't have an equivalence in the book by Gray and Meyer, but that's based on my own experience. You can read through this example. It's along the same lines. You know, by the way, this example is more of the same. Is more of the same. Let's get into an important topic now. And we're going to live with this topic till the end of this chapter. That's differential pairs or emitter coupled pair. This is one out of 3 important subjects in this chapter. We talked fast about 2 of them, but we're going to spend some time talking about this one. Yeah, the differential pair. The whole idea of a differential pair is that you get symmetry between the 2 sides of the amplifier. You know, this is these 2 resistors are equal. And you get 2 outputs. The differential amplifier has 2 inputs like this, V source 1 and V source 2, and it has outputs. You can take the output between VO1 and ground. That's one possibility. Between VO1 and ground. You can take the output between VO2 and ground. You can also take the output differentially between VO1 and VO2 without having a ground. If you take the output from V output 1 and ground, that's called a differential input single-ended output situation. You can take the output from here too. So it's a differential input single-ended output circuit. And there is a ground. If you take the output differentially between V output 1 and V output 2, there is no ground in this case. You take the output directly between VO1 and VO2. Uh, Generally speaking, you need to be very careful when you take the output differentially with no ground. Generally, we try to make all our circuit, all our output voltages containing a ground. There are